Hey everyone, I just wanted to share my school project presentation and also stress on some things that I think we should be talking more about these days, especially now that we have a lot of free time. Africa is a continent with many countries, and I think that if we have a union with a proper fiscal and economic policy, we would prosper as a continent. I'm going to start with a small history lesson. Let's talk about two different economic zones that have existed in Africa that pan more than one African country. I'm not going to include any economic zone that included an African and a non-African country. So let's get started. Unfortunately, these were not created by Africans themselves, but they did include a single currency used in more than one country. As you can see on the left, there is the franc zone, which is actually still used today. This is not a historical image. This is as it was today. All these countries use a franc, which is, I guess, some kind of currency that is created in France and shipped directly to these countries. The reason why there's one colored green and one colored red is because these are different in how they are used, like their value there locally. However, it is an interesting, still remaining remnant of colonial times. The one on the right was actually the British shilling that they made. It didn't really last for very long. As you can see, the dates are the dates it actually left. There is also a third part which doesn't actually include just Africa. It's the pound, the sterling pound. So they had the guineas as well they're actually still used in Sudan and in Egypt, but they're not related right now to Britain, neither the shilling nor the guineas. However, this just shows how much they wanted to profit from different countries, which of course you could see all these countries, they have different national identities, but their economic interests were aligned, especially for the colonists. Why do we have to wait for someone else to find benefit in it? Let me show you another example. It's a bit unorthodox, but nowadays China is investing a lot in Africa. In fact, they are benefiting from other kinds of colonial remnants, like countries that used to be from different European colonies having restrictions, like border restrictions and tolls. They now benefit from that by having cheaper ways of transportation from whichever country that they get the raw materials from to China in order to transport. I'll actually link a video to it in the description. It is an excellent video about China, Africa. It's not really what I'm getting into, it's just an example. So if we still have the franc zone, and you've watched the video and know about China now, what exactly is good for Africa? Which one would benefit it economically? Let's take a look at two neighboring countries. Let's look at the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic Congo. What do you think the minimum wage per hour in euros would be? I picked euros so we'd have one currency to talk with. Now this is per hour. So in the Democratic Republic of Congo, you would make only 15% of what you'd make in the Republic Congo, which trades mostly with France. So I picked out France and put it at the top there because in 2018, more than 50% of their trade was with France. This is the country that they traded with the most in that year. And as for Democratic Republic Congo, they trade with China. Egypt has a more of a free market economy. As you can see, in 2018, 7% of its international trade was with Italy. I understand that minimum wage is not usually the scale that most economists use, but I am using this because the whole benefit of a union is rather not to increase just GDP, but rather to increase the quality of life. Despite what the founders of the European Unions thought at the time, it actually benefited a lot of countries it wasn't intended to benefit. So thanks to the Eurozone, because workers can just travel to any country with no restrictions, they can find a better job for themselves. It has definitely benefited a lot of economies that have struggled after the war or have struggled under the USSR. Despite the different cultures, the different national identities that the Europeans have, they were able to establish an European free trade zone that does benefit Europeans firstly, as well as businesses. So it doesn't directly clash with capitalism. Therefore, it doesn't sound that dangerous to have a fiscal policy or some kind of economic union that we could emulate in Africa that is made by Africans to benefit them. It's actually quite ironic how the European Union is a positive example, despite how much France brings to the table that actually comes from Africa. But it was thanks to the European regulations that the value of the CFA became fixed and some kind of rights for workers were established.
Do we have a proposal for a free trade zone?
Excellent question, and no, we don't. Actually, in 2018, there was a unified African Union passport that was, considered, but then they completely forgot about it in 2019. And they said that they were going to discuss it after the elections that were to happen this year. Of course, with the whole corona thing happening, that is probably not going to happen.
How come we're unable to create a fiscal policy until now?
I believe we'd be able to have such a thing if we eliminate the borders that we have. Not just obviously the national borders, which are the definition of having a free trade zone, but also the cultural borders. For example, what are the trade languages in Africa? They are mostly non-African languages, English, French, and Arabic.
Culture and language are not the most important barriers to communication. Trade should transcend nationalism, and that's where the conversation stops.
That is mostly true. It doesn't matter whether we are speaking English or Arabic. What matters is that we do have a trade agreement anyways. For example, most of the EU doesn't speak, they have so many other languages, but they do acknowledge English or the more economically strong countries as the main language. This is more of a cultural movement being, Pan-African than sadly it should be more about economy and purely about economy, nothing else about culture. But embracing the culture doesn't really have anything wrong with it as long as it's not toxic nationalism. Kiswahili, an East African language, is now accepted by almost half of the continent as a trade language. That doesn't really tell much about how it will be used or how often it will be used, because sometimes there are policies that many countries make that end up benefiting the other foreign investors than the local investors, or they would benefit investors in general and completely ignore workers' rights. So it is not really defining of whether it is a step forward or not. I'm just saying we could make it a step forward if we prioritize workers' rights and local investors over anything else. As you can see, this was a school project. I'm simply just changing the tone to make it more fit for our internet audience, but I could make more descriptive videos about this or about how we could have a European kind of European Union model that is more fit for Africa because we are different. We do have different economies, different industries that, yeah, and obviously different history. Just let me know if you want to talk more about this. I think you should, share this sentiment with everyone. I think everyone should be talking more about it because if we push our presidents or whoever's ruling, if we push them into this narrative, we could definitely make it a thing. Thanks for watching. Bye now.